This episode of the Media Leader podcast was edited by our production partner, Trisonic. And if you're looking for podcast production support, we highly recommend them. Find them at trisonic.co.uk.
I think in future, brands are not going to be like, how do I work with creators? It's like, how do I become a creator? And how do I do that in my own way? I think that's really the forward-looking view that I have.
Welcome to the Media Leader podcast. I'm Jack Benjamin. How do brands keep up with social trends? It's a perennial question in an era marked by the sheer speed at which media moves, by all the noise out there on social media. But as brands continue to lean further and further into advertising on platforms and with creators, it's important to understand best practice for driving positive outcomes. Melissa Chapman is CEO of Jungle Creations, a publisher-powered social and influencer agency home to brands like Twisted, VT, and 49. I wanted to sit down with her to discuss the ever-changing shape of social media and how brands are challenged to reach young, increasingly niche and community-focused audiences across different platforms. We talked through Chapman's business strategy, how Jungle Creations makes the most of testing and learning on different platforms, the relative importance of brand safety, and how her recent ADHD diagnosis has given her a new perspective on her work life and leadership. This is that conversation I hope you enjoy. Melissa Chapman, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me on a sunny day.
A very sunny day. We're recording this on, well, I only know really Fahrenheit properly. What's it in Celsius today? It's like 73
I think it's going to go
Fahrenheit.
up to like 18.
Yeah. Oh,
Somebody
beautiful.
who knows the difference between the two is going to tell us.
Yeah.
Right there.
It's like it feels like summer, but we're talking on a lovely spring day in London. Melissa, I'm curious. You're a relatively young leader in the industry. You started your career. You started your career with a brief stint at Lad Bible, correct?
I actually started at Jungle, and then went to Lad and came back to Jungle.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were one of the first staff members at Jungle.
I was,
I
yes.
think it was like third ever staff member.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit how you got into the media industry in general, and then also what attracted you about Jungle in particular.
Yeah, I wish I could say it was a strategic entry into the media industry, but actually the more people that I talk to, I'm not sure many of us are like going, I want to grow up into media. I'm sure some are out there.
Why do you think that is?
It's just not well curriculum.
Right.
It's not taught at schools. It's not something that you're sort of pointed towards necessarily. I imagine that's shifted quite a lot now, but when I was younger, it just wasn't much of a thing. Sort of if you took a media A level, it was seen as like a DOS subject almost. Right. You just like were going in to watch films.
Right.
So I actually went to university to do journalism, with a view that I loved storytelling and telling stories in different mediums in different ways. Getting to be sort of both creative and investigative at the same time. That balance of sort of creative writing and factual writing and research, with no real end ambition, because when I was growing up, I thought I wanted to be a lawyer and a barrister. And I applied for sort of part-time jobs whilst I was in my last year of university to make a bit of, Friday night money, as you do.
Sure. And
there was an ad on Indeed for a part-time role at a place called Jungle Creations, which was, I sort of didn't know what it was. It didn't really exist yet. But I could only sort of look it up and think, it seems a little bit like BuzzFeed. Oh, that seems fun. BuzzFeed sort of were in their heyday at that point. So it was very exciting. So I applied for it, got the job. And after about 2 weeks, they asked me to go full time and finish my dissertation. So I had sort of 6 months left on my dissertation. I asked my university if I could finish it in the next 2 weeks. And they said yes, which was great. So I did that, submitted it, finished university slightly early so that I could go to Jungle and start full time. And that was sort of how I ended up there, really.
Nice. And you were named co-CEO in 2020.
Yeah.
And then since 23, you've been the sole CEO.
Yeah. So I've had many different roles at Jungle, actually. So when I first joined the business, I think I was a deputy editor. Mm-hmm. I don't know who I was deputy to because there was just 3 of us, but it was nice to have a nice title.
It was a good title, yeah.
Yeah, it was. I went to Lad for a little bit as operations manager. I had to Google what operations was at the time, but I took it. Came back home to Jungle as a head of social. And then I was our head of content, chief content officer, co-CEO, and then finally CEO, where I've been for the last couple of years. We sold the business to private equity in 2021. And at that point, our prior CEO, who was our founder, about a year before he'd sort of started exiting the business, had other passions that he wanted to pursue, which was why we were also looking to sell at that time. So myself and our chief operating officer took the helm as co-CEOs. I guess at the time we felt we had a real balance between operational thinking and sort of creative, strategic thinking. And that's what we both felt the best thing for the business was at the time for us to sort of share that role. And it was great. And it gave me a real opportunity to take what is quite an aggressive career step in a short period of time, feeling a little bit more protected
Sure.
and feeling like you had someone to riff ideas with, and also someone that thinks so differently to you that can challenge you in the ways that you probably need to be challenged, and vice versa. So yeah, we did that for a couple of years together, which was wonderful. And then Nat moved on to BBC, which is quite common, isn't it?
Moving on to the BBC.
All roads lead to the BBC in the end, don't they?
Sure.
Yeah, and I've been solo CEO since, which I've very much enjoyed.
Nice. I'll ask you a little bit about your growth strategy and your plans for leadership in a moment. But just as a reminder, what are all the brands that actually sit underneath Jungle?
Yeah, so I guess for anybody who doesn't know what Jungle is, Jungle, we are a digital media publisher in our origin story. And now we're also a publisher-powered social and influencer agency. So we started life building our own channels. We looked at sort of the magazine shelf of yesteryear, and you can see different passion. You've got your good food magazine, you've got your crafting magazine, you've got your home magazine. But we knew that people weren't really so much so picking up magazines anymore, and they were picking up their phones or picking up their laptops. So we wanted to build that sort of mirrored lifestyle publication network on these social platforms. So we've got Twisted that lives in food and drink. We've got Craft Factory, VT and entertainment, 49, which is female lifestyle. We've got an animal channel called Lovemals, Level Fitness. You get the drill. Collectively, they've got about 150 million followers across Snapchat, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, etc. And then sort of 4 years ago, we really thought, okay, brands need to become social publishers of their own right. They need to become the creators of tomorrow. You know, I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that. And who better to help them as an agency than the people who've done it for themselves and continue to do it for themselves on what has been sort of shoestring budgets initially, because we had to be profitable immediately. So I think we've sort of created a really agile, cost-effective social influencer agency solution for brands who are looking to turn themselves into publishers akin to the Red Bulls of the world.
And what's your strategy then for growing the business now that you're a couple of years in as the only CEO?
Yeah, I mean, growth for us comes fortunately from a number of directions, because we've got a diversified business model. So we still generate quite serious revenues from being a publisher, from generating video views on our own channels, and then also turning them from online communities into offline communities. So Twisted, which is our food channel, we have 50 restaurants across the UK. We've got products in supermarkets. We've got a new one coming later this year.
Oh, what is it? Can you tell me?
I can't tell you.
Okay.
I was told it's on record. I'm talking to a journalist.
Yeah.
But we did one last year in Iceland. Beforehand, we did a beer in the co-op. It seems to be sort of an annual thing that we like to do. And now we're doing a chilled range in a major retailer. So continuing to lean into our own brands, 49, which is our female brand. We've obviously got our channels online, but we've got an audio podcast. We had Amanda Holden on the F across the weekend. That's now charting in the Spotify's top 20 podcasts in the UK, which is amazing.
Nice.
And how do we take that into roadshows, real world events, live pods, etc. So we feel like we've got almost an embarrassment of opportunities here. And for us, it's really about focusing and not trying to do too much.
How do you break down in terms of where you'd like to see revenues coming in from across that diversity of potential? Because I imagine it's quite difficult to make consistent revenue from social platforms if you don't really have full control over that audience. I mean, I've seen and heard from other publishers that,
of course, like we've seen the horror stories, right? And for us as a business, that's another key reason why we launched our agency. When the sun is shining on publishing and on platforms, you make that hay, and it tends to be, for us at least, quite high margin, moves very, very quickly. The revenue comes in quickly. It's quite simple in terms of the transactional element. It's not pitching, you're not doing all of that sort of opportunity cost. However, you're living on rented land, which is why it's also important to build your own offline environments, build a 360 brand, and really strengthen your community. But on the agency side, we launched that because we wanted platforms that were retained. I wake up in the morning and I know that I'm making money for the next 18 months. I've got a commitment of X amount from X brand. It's not as high margin, but it's certainly high value to us as a business in terms of diversifying that. In terms of a preference of where it comes from, look, what I think is important in any business is not having over-reliance on any one platform, any one revenue model. So really what is key is balance. If one goes up, I like the other one to sort of try and proportionately grow at the same rate. But at the end of the day, we've been in a tough market for the last 2 to 3 years, right? So for any business growth from anywhere, you're not going to be too fussy about it. And we're fortunate to have been growing really, really well, particularly last year and into this year. So yeah, in truth, it's just about balance rather than one versus the other.
Mm. And how would you describe your leadership strategy? How big is the team at Jungle?
So we're about 115.
Okay, that's pretty good size,
now.
yeah.
Yeah, and I've got a senior leadership team of 4 people that work with me, and then they have their own senior management teams, etc. So whilst it's 120 people, I don't feel directly like I'm managing, all of those people. I've got a really, really strong team around me that do it. But in terms of my leadership style, how I would describe it, I mean, it's almost better to ask other people this, isn't it? And their perception of you, because what I do try to do is just be authentically myself. I sort of can't help that. It's a little bit my personality as well. And I think what I learned from the start of my career, getting to lead at quite a young age, albeit I'm still fairly young, it was like I was trying to fit a mold and present as the leader that I expected to see, or what I grew up hearing that leaders were. And I think that became a much more challenging environment for me to actually have an impact on the business or be successful, because you use quite a lot of your energy doing that. And then where's the remains of your energy? I don't think you're giving the fullest that you can. So particularly for the last 4 to 5 years, it's been about being unequivocally myself. And actually, again, I can't speak for my teams, but I think people respect that honesty. And also it creates an environment where people feel they can bring their authentic selves to work, which is so important for the success and happiness of all teams and people. So sorry if that feels like a wishy-washy answer, but...
Well, it's interesting because I feel like authenticity is the buzzword of all things
Christ,
social media. No, not but not in the workplace necessarily.
Yeah.
When people talk about the what's great about social media, authenticity is kind of the term used, and the importance of brands being quote unquote authentic, which is a bit of an oxymoron, because in order to sell something, you kind of can't be entirely authentic, because you ultimately want someone's money for a product.
Yeah.
But I don't necessarily always hear that in terms of from leadership, the sort of need to be candid or themselves. So it's interesting to hear that from you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And look, I think the authentic piece on as regards to social media, I think we've been hearing that for years, whether it's, brands' tone of voice, influencers, and brands allowing influencers to be themselves, many a panel we've all listened to where that has been,
many a panel we've hosted.
Yes, sure. Exactly. Yeah. Where that has been the feedback. And I think that's, it's still coming up, because it's probably still not happening quite to the level that it needs to. Otherwise we wouldn't keep going on about it to each other. But I also think, particularly for brands being authentic, everything on social goes in waves and it comes around and it's cyclical. I was there in the days of Vine when it was short form, and then that died and everybody was pushing you to long form, and then everything had to be 3 minutes plus, and then it's back to short form, and then all the platforms sort of mirror each other in quite uninteresting ways. And I think we're in a cycle at the moment where we're seeing a big spike in employee generated content. It's, for brands, who are the people behind the brand? And everybody's like finding that quite funny. And what that allows brands to do is speak very much like a human and a human voice, and probably enter conversations they wouldn't otherwise have permission for. So I do think there's authenticity at the root of that, but I think it's just sort of the same thing reversioned in a different way of what we've seen before. And I think really for me, it's about how brands just stand out. And, have you seen it where you go to a viral video on TikTok now, you've got 75 comments from 75 brands all getting involved in the conversation. Do
you like that?
Not really.
Yeah, I was going to say, as a consumer, I find it really weird that all of the comms PRs of all these different brands are clearly sort of like friends or working together.
Yeah.
And it feels almost dystopian.
And look, there's a level of community management which is valuable for brands. If you're watching a really sad video that's a tearjerker and you see Kleenex in the comments being like, here's one for you or whatever, and they're really relevant to that environment because it's their tissue brand, right? Got it. But then if I see Crocs and 700 others all saying the same thing, it's like, are we living in an echo chamber? It's like marketing for marketeers sort of thing, isn't it? Right. So
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of hype and excitement on LinkedIn around certain brands. You know, this comment got 10,000 likes on this channel. But I think the brands that really think about long-term, measurable, meaningful impact online that goes beyond just authenticity, it's strategy. What's your business goals? Where's the ROI for this? How is this tying to your performance marketing? How are you using influencers in ways beyond top of the funnel down to sort of purchase? And it's really the responsibility of social and influencer agencies to connect those strategies as well. And I think that's what we're trying to do a little bit differently in the space, which feels like I've just led to a big plug, which it wasn't. But yeah, that's just me being super honest.
How do you make sure you measure success accurately across different platforms? Because they're all measuring views, impressions differently from each other. And frankly, from what I've heard from different platforms, a view doesn't really mean anything at all. I mean,
No.
On TikTok, my understanding is a view is basically equivalent to an impression. So
Yeah.
when people say, come out with press releases or are bragging about getting, 100,000 or 100 million views on TikTok videos, that's actually just the algorithm really liking your stuff more so than people necessarily seeking it out, right? So how do you know that the views actually count for something?
Yeah, look, I think being honest, gone are the days. I think it's particularly with our social agency clients, we're on long-term retained strategic partnerships with them. They're not really buying views off of us. I think those days are sort of over. Brands and marketing directors and social teams internally at brands, I think they get that. So there's less education than there used to need to be. Often it's about depth of community, levels of engagement. Quite often it's about performance. Are we shifting units? Like, what's
Outcomes.
happening? Yeah. What? How much is this impacting your product sales if you're a product brand? So there's a nuanced KPI depending on the client, right? But I think the days of clients going, I want X amount of views is sort of already retiring itself. Not to say that there's not value to mass awareness and mass eyeballs. I think everybody knows that. There will always be media buying. There will always be that value of scaled media. But when we're on long-term strategic relationships with our clients who really want to invest in social as an environment for them to build their own sort of community within over the long time, it's not so much about views. You still do see follower growth as a metric that brands want to see, right? Because I guess that's a sign that you're building a community. But I would say it's evolved quite a lot from just looking at views, which solves the headache of every platform measuring differently. However, we have built a tool called Jungle IQ that sort of ingests all of the different things and creates something more universal for our clients that we can plug them into as well.
So how do you go about building community, especially around a brand? Because some brands might speak to communities more so than others, but it's also having a community of people that really are affiliated or have an affinity toward that brand that you're really after, correct?
Yeah, and look, I think it's easier for some brands to do it than others, right? If I pull Heinz as an example, I think Heinz have done a fantastic job with The Kitchen, which is their sort of internal agency, building out their owned and operated social channels. But you've got to remember that, especially in the UK, people feel connected to Heinz tomato ketchup. It's a part of our life, and the beans. So they've got a ready-made community that they just needed to access and reach in the right ways and expand over time. And I think they've executed it fantastically. But then if you go to talk to an insurance company, much more difficult for them to do it. So it varies by brand, but when brands come to us, it's being really honest with them about what their opportunity is. Are they forcing themselves into a community, or do they have a natural space to play? And if so, how can we help them locate those audiences? Where are they living online? And therefore, where should we be positioning them as a brand and spending more of their investment? It's not just, it's just TikTok for TikTok's sake. If your community isn't there, maybe it's on Discord, maybe it's on Twitch, right? And it takes, proper strategy, like grown-up strategy to start shaping that for brands. And then there's loads of tactics that go underneath that, from your content strategy, your creative framework, your influencer and creator integration into that strategy, potentially even your paid. It's your community management. It's where you show up, how you show up, when you show up. And what we try to do for brands as well is mirror art. What's unique to us at Jungle is the in real life to URL. We call it URL to IRL. And how can we do that for our brand partners too? So recently we did a campaign with Doritos in Q4. like lots of different recipe content relevant across Twisted. But then across the Twisted restaurants that we have in the UK, we actually activated Doritos, nachos, etc., so that we could connect what was happening online. People could reach into the screen, pull the food out, and have it actually in their hands, which just feels far more tangible and sort of closes that loop. So yeah, there's a number of different tactics there.
Yeah, it's all really interesting because I can picture a Twisted video using Doritos to make some sort of meal and then to say, "Well, come to our restaurants," and then you can actually eat the thing that we've made for you.
It's all delivery only, so you don't even have to come to us. We'll come to you.
Even better for the lazy people out there.
Exactly. Not that we're encouraging that.
No, well, yeah. There's a lot of debate around where social media should sit on media plans. I think it was our most read piece in 2024. It was research from Essence Mediacom's Rich Kirk that found that major brands, the ones that work with big agencies, could be spending 3 times more than is efficient on social media. And on the other hand, you had Unilever committing to say, actually, we're going to spend half of our media budget on social media going forward, despite that research coming out a couple months earlier. I'm curious where you see social media's power on media plans in general.
Look, I'm very much of the social world. I grew up within it. I work within it as a publisher and as an agency. So it comes with a level of self-indoctrination that I really believe in the value of social media. And I don't think that investments are going backwards. I definitely think we're seeing more budgets shift towards social.
But I guess the question is, should they be shifting in that direction?
I would say yes, right? And it depends what you're trying to achieve as a brand, right? And there'll be somebody who's way smarter than me that sits centrally, that is the analyst that writes these reports that says, okay, you should be putting it to TV for this, radio for that, and here's the impact of social. So I can't speak, and it would be, disingenuous of me to say I believe social is the Holy Grail for anything. Mm-hmm. But what I have seen is, for the clients that we've worked with, very impactful results. They're coming back again and again and again. We're lifting sort of real business performance metrics for a number of our clients, particularly in influencer marketing. We're using influencer marketing as a, bottom of the funnel purchase, and we've lowered CPAs aggressively for clients and helped them grow their businesses, often if they're smaller clients at that point in time. So it'd be remiss of me not to say yes, put all your budgets in social. But I wouldn't claim to be, data literate across the whole spectrum to argue that aggressively. But certainly we're seeing it happen more, and we're seeing happy clients.
You mentioned the importance of sort of working with influencers as part of that. Do you think brands get enough out of influencers, generally speaking? Look,
I think the influencer landscape has sort of peaked and troughed out of favour over the last 10 years. I remember at some point influencer felt like a dirty word. I think this was maybe like 7 years ago, and then we all started calling them creators.
Yes, I remember. Yeah.
Do you remember that? Yeah.
Well, I wasn't working in the industry yet, but I remember there was a big backlash against influencers because, frankly, they're annoying, and they still are. If you're out in public and you see everyone's like taking selfies on their phone and like trying to hustle, and
Well, to be honest, I think what's changed is that it's gone from sort of the top 1 or 2% of people who maybe are particularly good looking or whatever else being the influencers to sort of everybody with an iPhone or Samsung or
anybody can be.
Yeah, anybody. Democratized. It's very democratized, but a lot of people. It's not just about you've got 1 million followers, so you're an influencer or a creator. It's, are you creating interesting content online that is building up a community? It doesn't have to be a massive one, that really care about what you're doing, and how can you then support brands in that way. So I think the space is shifting a lot. I think in future brands are not going to be like, how do I work with creators? It's like, how do I become a creator, and how do I do that in my own way? I think that's really the forward-looking view that I have.
That's interesting.
And that can mean that you've got consistent creators operating as ambassadors that become the face of your brand, or, you're doing it in your own right. You see it with a lot of brands. They're using their own employees or paid actors dressed in uniforms, who knows?
Sure.
And that is where I think the space gets really, really interesting, where brands are not just renting influence or borrowing influence or paying to sit on an influencer's feed, but actually building that and leveraging that in their own environments.
But to the conversation at the very beginning as well, this sort of authenticity question. I think most people are drawn to individual influencers or creators, whatever you want to call them, because they like that person for who they are, or who they portray themselves to be. I mean, I
Yeah.
think everyone's a little bit fake on social media, at least, if not extremely fake. But
Tell us how you really feel.
well, I mean, that's my personal
Yeah,
sense
no.
of the creator economy, and that's totally fine. But the people that do really well, regardless of whether or not they are being true to themselves, are the ones that appear to be really true to
Mhm.
themselves. A brand, to me, must struggle to get across a message authentically, because at the end of the day, the goal is we want to sell you a product.
Yeah, no, I get that. I think it's slightly skeptical, which is totally your entitlement, by the way. And actually, I think there's a lot of creators and influencers that we know or we've worked with or that actually work for us that do show up really, I promise you, really authentically when I meet them in the real world and online. And I think that bravery is what cuts creators above the rest. You know, I think that really stands out, and I think audiences appreciate it, and it helps them be more successful. It is more difficult for brands to do it in the same way, but I don't think it's impossible. And I also think happiness equals your expectations being managed, right? People aren't going to go on to, Disney's accounts and expect it to be as authentic as Gary from down the road, right?
Yeah.
But it's surprising, delighting them, breaking the third wall, and giving that creator and personality, humanized tone of voice that I think people really appreciate. So I think perhaps you're right, but I think what people expect from brands is slightly different to what they expect from an individual, and I think brands can still win by leaning into that to the right degree.
What's been brands' general concern around brand safety in the first? We're past Q1 now of the year. It was a huge topic. Obviously, in January, Meta changing its content moderation policies across all of its platforms, many of which are massive.
Yeah.
Now that we're a little bit settled into what a new normal is starting to look like, what's been the response from brands? Have they been a little bit more concerned about certain platforms than others?
Look, we don't do a lot of work on X, which I think is the brand that has been under the spotlight over the last couple of years for brand safety in the most aggressive way. And I think that's still a concern for brands. We're quite fortunate that a lot of the brands we work with are quite established, blue chip clients, your Disneys, your Superdrugs, etc. So brand safety is incredibly important to the brands we talk to. And there's a constant sort of strategic piece of work that we have to do about where's the right risk level for this client, because risk does equal reward creatively, I think, especially. So where do we push and pull in the environments we're in? But what we'd never do is compromise on the core brand safety pieces. So when I talk about risk, I talk about, tone of voice and where you sort of take the brand out of its natural ecosystem and put it somewhere else in quite a nice, interesting, inverted way. But when it comes to bottom line brand, fundamental brand safety pieces, I think particularly with the brands we're dealing with, there's not a lot of let up there, and I don't think you'd expect there to be. What have you seen?
Well, to me, what's most interesting is brands seem to care. I mean, especially if you are a large brand, you want to be generally conservative around where you're showing up in terms of adjacency. They seem to care a great deal about where their brand shows up in terms of the places that they have a lot of control over, meaning a lot of the publishers will get ads pulled if they are worried that there's a article about Israel Gaza, let's say, and the brand doesn't want to be associated next to that on a news website, and they can take that down pretty easily. But there's no real control over the adjacency, because everyone's feeds are unique to them.
Yeah.
Of where a brand might show up on my feed versus your feed versus millions of different people's feeds, and yet the concern from brands seems to be a lot more muted, maybe because they can't control that, or they can't see in exactly where their ad is showing up on these platforms.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the challenge with social and digital has always been too much data, and therefore too much scrutiny and too much of everything, right? And that creates an opportunity for overburdening control and stress and worry. Can you imagine if you're a brand who has bought an out of home poster, you can't control what happens in the street around it. And if we've been obsessing about that for as long, and now look, I'm not trying to understate some of the stuff on X, and I don't think it's quite like for like in that way, but I think you can overthink and overlook into all of those things. I think that as you're scrolling through your feed, if you see a brand and then 3 posts later you see something else, you don't necessarily blame that brand for that, do we? Maybe,
No, I don't think
yeah,
so. But I feel the same way about news publishing. I mean, if I saw an advertisement next to an article about war, I wouldn't think, wow, this brand is super pro-war.
Oh, no. Yeah.
I would just think they bought an ad in this newspaper because they support their journalism.
Yeah. You do see some really unfortunate placements sometimes, though, don't you? Even
but everywhere.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
I mean, the concern, I remember, I think it was Coca-Cola ended up polling, this was a while back, but like you had ads that were showing ads next to Nazi content because of the content moderation problem.
Yeah, I mean, that's insane, to be fair.
But this is the sort of muck that you would think as a brand you would be concerned about going in, but it seems like brands aren't necessarily as concerned to that level.
Yeah, I mean, for us, by and large, we're not doing a tremendous amount of media buying for our clients. It's much more organic, native, in their own feed environment. So it might be one that we're seeing slightly less of. But yeah, it hasn't been a loud bit of feedback that I've seen this year about that in particular.
Oh, it's definitely interesting. Well, take me into the future then. What does influencer marketing look like in 5 years' time? I mean, it's a crystal ball moment.
Yeah.
Obviously, you have no real idea. But give me some insights on what you're sort of seeing future facing.
Look, I think there's every chance that we do a big 360 loop and we end up back where we are now. Just based on sort of how I've seen it over the last 10 years, it does feel like there's 3 or 4 year sort of cyclical loops that happen. I think it would be remiss again not to reference AI. And look, I've got quite a lot of opinions about AI, to be honest.
What's the big takeaway?
Well, like personally, I'm quite fascinated by it. So I'm quite obsessive in playing with it and seeing what it can do and learning about it. I also think practically from a business perspective, it can be a great accelerant to our growth and the way that we operate in interesting ways. But I also do think that it needs regulation. I do think that there's a lot of, talk about AI will replace this. Yeah, the feeds are going to be filled with AI content and AI creators.
They already are, really.
Yeah, I see comments now like people tagging Grok or whatever saying, is this AI or not? Is it real or not? People do want to know if it's real or not. And I think probably people are going to go against it a little bit and creatively. But I also think human creativity is going to shine through even more and people are going to have even higher value for it. Maybe that's sentimental, optimistic view, but that's sort of where I sit. But in terms of, I guess, answering your actual question about influencer marketing, look, I think right now, particularly based on, NI hikes, business challenges, so on, it's become much more performance driven. And we're seeing that when we're getting influencer briefs, it's like, can we white label these assets? Can we use them as paid ads? Can we drive them sort of and put them in different environments? So I think we'll see, a couple more years of that. But over the longer haul, I think for us, it'll be more about format, programming, I think mirroring, brands doing more on YouTube and longer form content on YouTube, integrating creators as the sort of reality or celebrity stars of tomorrow, which is quite fun. Again, optimistic, creative point of view there. But yeah, I think anybody who could go 5 years ahead and predict would be earning a lot of money right now.
I remember when YouTube, you couldn't really upload videos longer than 10 minutes without the algorithm killing it. And so it was the standard to do short to medium term. And now it's like 3 hour long videos with podcasts. And so I don't know where it's going to be, obviously.
I think we did a session, and don't quote me on this, but I think we did a session with YouTube at the start of this year and they shared with us that the optimal length at the moment was 28 minutes.
That feels really long to me. I mean, that's like a whole television episode.
Yeah, but you say that when I'm at home, it's a novelty for me to go put on the normal telly. It's called normal telly now, which is your terrestrial TV. Most of the time I'm watching YouTube, long form content on YouTube or, the apps. So normal telly is usually a Saturday night only for something that's live. So I think it makes sense that YouTube viewership so much is happening through CTV right now that it is getting longer and longer. And I even bought a premium thing because they just kept throwing more ads in as well. So I had to get
Oh, wow. So you actually wanted to avoid the ads. Wow.
Not on our own content, no.
Right.
But yeah.
But I think that's a very good point. I mean, the user experience definitely gets complained about on all of these platforms because there's so many ads. And also the content itself is often sponsored. Yeah.
I mean, even on ITVX or what are Channel 4 calling it nowadays? 4OD, C4, I can't remember, they keep rebranding it. But I always buy the subscription so that I'm not watching the ads. But look, the content, the people who are creating the content now, that money still filters down to them in a slightly nuanced way, right?
Right. But I guess the question is, how do you cut through all of the noise? Especially if you're working on behalf of a brand, there's all these different platforms. Sometimes I guess you need 28 minutes on YouTube. You need obviously much shorter time on TikTok. And there's so many different people. I can't keep up with the different influencers that someone's really famous to millions of people and I've never heard of this person. How do you make sure you're actually making audience connections that last?
It's about knowing your niche. Like, again, that's, I think, been a buzzword of the last 6 months, but it's becoming so much more about, leaning in to your category, leaning into your niche rather than trying to be everything to everyone. And I think that's where brand was probably why you don't know them, because somebody's got 28 million followers because they're in a niche that you're not interested in, but the people that are there and they're showing up in swaves. So for us, for example, on 49, which is our female lifestyle brand, we've got a podcast called Tea at 4, which is all about sort of very Gen Z millennial group chat gossip. And when we're casting and producing for that show, we are militant with the people that would be right for it, the conversations that would be right for it, and those that wouldn't. And that might mean that, okay, we're not going to get to a million followers as quickly because we're not jumping on every opportunity that appears. But the people that do stay up, the people that show up stay. Your retention is so much longer. The depth of the engagement and the power of the community is there. And I think that's what brands need to do as well. If they're going to kind of say you're Marks and Spencer's and you want to launch a new YouTube strategy around programming, it's not just about doing recipe content. It's understanding who is the M&S consumer on YouTube, doing that research, working with the right partner, and really leaning into that with the relevant creators and the relevant content.
What have you learned from working with young talent? I mean, you yourself are young talent.
Well, I'm 32 now, so not as young as I once was.
Well, but for a CEO,
yeah,
that's definitely on the younger
I feel
end.
about 50, but that's what have I learned from working with young talent? I mean, look, our social teams and our creative teams is a young average age at Jungle. I think it's important and it's natural that that's happened because of the spaces that we operate on. That being said, we have all ages across the business, and I think that adds important diversity of thought. Young people, it was almost a shock to me initially because I was always, even today, you're young for your position. So I've always felt sort of young in the room. Now I'm starting to feel really old.
Yeah, I'm younger than you by a couple of years. I'm
Are
sorry
you?
to say.
See what I mean? I'm actually old. But when we started getting more like sort of Gen Z workforce, a totally different approach to work that, I think far more challenging at times, quite refreshingly or scarily honest. And I think creating an environment where they can bring that to work, also bring that to their work, and the way that we communicate it to audiences is so powerful. I'm learning stuff there's words I don't understand anymore. There were apparently emojis, the way that you use them. I was told by some of my staff that if I use the thumbs up, that's quite passive aggressive.
Yeah, so I've heard.
You know that. Of course you do.
Well, I am Gen Z.
Oh,
at the very top end of the generation.
There you go.
So, yeah.
The laughing emoji is embarrassing. You have to use the skull now for finding something funny.
Okay.
But I mean, I'm being silly about it, but every day is an education.
Right.
And learning lots and lots from.
You're working on your Riz.
Young talent. I'm working on my Riz. Yeah. Skibbity Riz. That's the thing, is it?
The skibbity toilet thing doesn't make any sense. Yeah, that's talk about weird. I mean, but then again, when I was much younger, like, teenager level, the neon cat was the dumbest, stupidest, most funny thing in the world. And that was big for like a couple weeks.
We were salad fingers, I think.
I remember salad fingers as well.
That might have been our era.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's all these, so if you're a brand trying to make sense of this.
Oh, well, even now. So my nephews are 12 and 13, I think. And they're Gen Alpha. They're all for YouTube. They're obsessed with YouTube. They're all editing. I thought badly. My nephew sends me these videos. I thought then I go on to sort of KFC's TikTok, and it's like, oh, it actually looks quite similar to what you were doing over there, because they've really lent into the sort of Gen Alpha creative. I think that's it's subjective, isn't it? Ultimately,
well, yes.
And their numbers are doing very, very well, and those that get it really get it. And for KFC, they're probably targeting that sort of consumer, right? So it probably makes a tremendous amount of sense for them. But it's changing so quickly, and the biggest shifts I'm seeing is in the shape and style of the creative and sort of levels of how unhinged it is. Now, look, I'll be really honest, I do hope that comes back to normalcy a little bit because I don't get it. It's this brain rot thing.
Yeah.
But lots of people do. And I think it's important that in our business, we've got people across the board who can understand those communities, understand those worlds, and ensure that we bring it to our clients and can execute it authentically. Back to authentic again.
Yeah. We get trends reports all the time from all the different platforms. How important are those to your point around the speed at which things kind of change? Does it actually matter what's currently trending? Or are you looking at more of these longer term trends in terms of maybe the creative activation or the types of creative that's being done?
Yeah, look, I think it's a bit of both. Generally speaking, by the time the trends reports come out, they've happened, right? So they've sort of stopped being as valuable. I think predictions, so Pinterest actually do amazing predicts, and I really rate those. And they said at the end of last year that it was all going to be about sort of cherry aesthetic for like female lifestyle. And I can tell you, I don't know if they just made it happen, but I saw cherry everywhere on my feed in Q1, like cherry aesthetic in beauty and that space. For us, it's a bit of both of the short term and the long term. We have built our own platform. So every single video, we do about 30,000 videos a year. Every single video that we upload to one of these platforms, we've got a meta tagging methodology that sits behind it. What color is the thumbnail? How long is it? Is it vertical or horizontal? What ingredients are in the recipe? Is it natural sound or licensed tracks? You can imagine it's a huge matrix. We then overlay that with the performance trends where we see how that asset performs, and we start to get real contextual insights into our content of, okay, if you've got a red thumbnail, you're getting a higher click-through rate on this platform with this demographic. It's
like the ultimate A, B, C through F testing.
Well, this is it. We built it for ourselves because we're a publisher. So it was about how do we get more hits and less misses, and how do I democratize this sort of, because it was all like back in my day, it was like, I believe this is going to do well. Gut feel, I just know. And we wanted to democratize that. So we built this platform, and what it now means for our brands, especially if they're in the same categories as we operate. We're talking to a food and drink brand. I've got all of this twisted data as one of the biggest food and drink publishers on social to say, okay, chicken is over-indexing versus beef with men and they're getting higher engagement rate. Or what we actually found is in our crafting channel, resin, if you use resin in the hack or the craft, it was overperforming like 4x on engagement to everything else. So if you're talking to a relevant brand, how can we use resin in this? And that just gets you that fundamental performance, but then it's also tying it to a long-term strategy and a long-term trend of what is this brand trying to say, and therefore what should they be doing?
But isn't there a concern then that if enough people are all doing this, you end up with it's not lowest common denominator, that's not the right term exactly, but sort of everything ends up looking the same. That's why you get like Mr. Beast videos are all like in all caps, all the titles all the time, and you always have his face in it with some crazy stuff going on in the thumbnail. And like, to me, that's like that, maybe just because I don't know, maybe I'm a dick about this, but like that is like an easy, like I will never watch a video that's like that, or a news influencer video that has like someone got destroyed. Like, that to me speaks that the algorithm is telling them to do this, but it doesn't mean that it's good quality.
No, I agree with you. And look, I think our rule of thumb is if we always do what we always did, we'll always be what we always were. So there is, yes, the data is important, and what is it telling us about some, I guess, more like technical, fundamental background things about the way that we construct our content, but there should always be originality and new, fresh thinking. And we have a sort of strategy on some of our own channels, best, test, rest. What's our best stuff that we know is working really well that we need to continue scaling? Where's the areas that we need to test? And we're just going to try stuff completely new, because that's how you stop following trends and start creating them. And what stuff do we rest? We're bored of it. We're tired of it. It's fatigued now. We're seeing it sort of fall out of favor and fall out of trend. So it's a very big blend of art and science, and I can tell that you're an appreciator of that art element of it, and I think that's important, and I think that's important to us as a business and to our clients as well. So it's always about that balance.
So I want to circle back at the end here back to your leadership skills and strategy, and I wanted to note, you are neurodiverse. You were diagnosed with ADHD less than 2 years ago.
Yes, I was 30.
And I'm curious, just how that diagnosis has given you any different perspective on yourself, on your own leadership, and how you've sort of taken that forward.
Yeah. Look, I think, and I've spoken a little bit about this before, so I don't guess, well, I say repeat myself. I don't assume anyone's read anything that I've done before, so this will be fresh on all of you. I grew up very much, I was quite naughty at school. I was suspended. I was banned from all school trips. I was suspended. I ended up being head girl, which a lot of people couldn't really work out. I had a big turnaround in like year 11.
Right.
But I never felt that I was, someone to follow the rules or follow the guidelines. I sort of thought it was a me problem, like why, I'm misbehaving. Well, I didn't actually think it was a problem. I was just doing it. But as I got older, I was like, why do you do this? And I felt I got frustrated at myself. I find myself quite impatient. I've never had an unbelievably positive temper. And it's always felt like something that I've had to manage. I get bored really quickly.
Hopefully not during this conversation.
No, not at all. I've really enjoyed it, actually. I also felt, am I lazy? Like I get paralysis quite a lot about like, I've got so many things happening in my brain that I just can't do anything. And that's quite difficult, especially as I've also been really competitive, and it's important to me to win or try and be successful. And I felt like that my career has sort of been, you get imposter syndrome at the best of the time. I was young. I rose quickly. I'm a woman. I'm gay. Many reasons to have imposter syndrome. And then when I learned that I had ADHD, I learned so much about myself and what was just actually a part of my brain working differently to everybody else's. And actually many of it as a positive. I'd say the biggest unlock was me. I sort of learned to forgive myself, which sounds quite sentimental, and I guess it sort of is, and be kind to myself. And in that, it massively changed the way I brought myself to work, the way I felt about myself, and therefore probably the way that I led the business. So what's really critical for me is creating an environment in our business where everybody, because, neurodiversity is such a big and broad spectrum, and beyond that as well. How can we create, as far as is possible for us, we're not a 10,000 person business with budgets aren't endless, but how can we also create an environment where people feel they can do that? And hopefully by me being open and honest at work, I've had employees that work for us come up to me before and say they were getting a diagnosis and they wanted to talk to me about it. And this might not be someone that I talk to every day naturally in meetings, but it's important for me that we create that environment where people feel that they can do that here and bring them best selves to work, because it's a superpower.
Do you think the media industry does a good enough job of being inclusive of neurodiverse people?
I haven't worked many other places, so I couldn't talk for the experience there. But look, I do think media it's improved a lot. It's infamous for, especially on the client side, it's like going out and it's being really social and it's maybe having a drink and so on. And if you were sat on the neurodiversity spectrum in some, different ways, to me, that might be really difficult for you. And that might feel quite exclusionary. And that might feel like you can't climb your career in the same way that other people have because of that. So I do think we would need to be really conscious of that and try to do better. But I actually think media as an industry is talking a lot. Maybe it's because I'm in it. I'm seeing a lot of conversation about ADHD. I'm seeing a lot of openness about it. I'm seeing a lot of coverage on it. So, and I actually think that when they do a study at some point, there's probably an over-indexing of people who have ADHD in the media industry because I think it's super creative. But yeah, I think I don't think it's the worst of industries, but I think we've got every industry has work to do.
And finally, what advice would you give to other neurodiverse folks within the industry?
Well, if you haven't already, forgive yourself and be kind to yourself, because I think that's really important. I think for me, and everybody's ADHD might show up differently, but I delegate ruthlessly because I know what I'm not good at, and stop trying to be good at the stuff you're not good at and surround yourself with people who are and who are better than you at it, so that you can spend your energy on the things that you are really good at, which will have a massive impact on your business. For me, that's ideas, creativity, challenging why aren't we doing that over there, and stress testing that. And then when it comes to the 75-point execution plan of how we do that, I'll give that to someone else because I will do it badly and they will do it fantastically. So I would say that.
Dare I say that's good advice for anyone. Right?
Yeah, well, maybe, hopefully it is. Yeah.
Well, Melissa, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for
likewise.
joining.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Media Leader Podcast. Our executive producer is me, Jack Benjamin. Special thanks to our production partner, Trisonic. You can find all our episodes on the podcast platform of your choice or on our website at uk.themedialeader.com. But do please remember to subscribe to be notified of our next episode. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at The Media Leader to receive daily coverage of all the biggest news stories in media and advertising. From all of us at The Media Leader, I'm Jack Benjamin. See you next time.